I had spent 57 years learning how to swallow my voice, to fold my pain into neat squares and tuck it away where no one could see it bleed. My son's whisper that morning, "Cry louder," felt like a scalpel sliding between my ribs, precise and deliberate. I did cry louder, and when I finally stood before that jury months later, every sob I had ever silenced came flooding back with a vengeance that would change everything. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. Before we begin, I'd be truly grateful if you'd take a moment to like this video and consider subscribing to the channel. It helps me keep sharing these stories with those who need them most. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and I live in a cramped studio apartment on the south side of Chicago, where the elevated train rumbles past my window every 12 minutes like clockwork. The building smells of old cooking grease and mildew, a far cry from the spacious Victorian house in Oak Park where I raised my 3 children. That house, with its wraparound porch and stained glass windows, had been my grandmother's, passed down to me with the understanding that family comes first, always. I sold it 6 years ago when Daniel, my eldest, said he needed capital to invest in cryptocurrency, that this was the future, that I'd be set for life if I just trusted him. I wake each morning at 5:30, not because I have anywhere to be, but because my body refuses to forget 40 years of nursing shifts that started before dawn. I sit at my kitchen table, a wobbly Formica thing I found at a thrift store, and I drink instant coffee because the good stuff, the beans I used to grind fresh, feels like an extravagance I no longer deserve. Through my window, I watch the city wake up, delivery trucks rumbling down Halsted Street, the distant glow of downtown Chicago's skyline catching the first pink light of morning. The morning sky changes with the seasons, brutal gray in winter, soft lavender in spring, that particular golden quality in autumn that makes you forget, just for a moment, that winter is coming. I used to be part of that energy, that purposeful movement. Now I'm just background noise, a woman the world has agreed to forget. The phone sits on the table beside my coffee, and I stare at it the way a dog stares at a door, hoping for someone to come home. Daniel hasn't called in 3 weeks. My daughter Rebecca sends perfunctory text messages, busy with work, kids have soccer, talk soon, that arrive like parking tickets, obligatory and cold. My youngest, Thomas, blocked my number 6 months ago after I asked, just once, where the money had gone. The $15,000 he'd sworn was for his daughter's medical bills. That particular morning, the morning everything cracked open, I received a text message from Daniel at 7:15. "Mom, I need you to sign something. Can you meet me at the lawyer's office on LaSalle at 10? No greeting. No explanation, just a command disguised as a request. My hands trembled as I typed back, "What is this about?" He responded immediately, "Just trust me. You always say family comes first, right?" Those words, family comes first. I'd said them so many times over the years that they'd become my personal mantra, my guiding principle, the explanation for every sacrifice. When I missed my own mother's last birthday because Daniel needed help moving apartments, when I skipped my best friend's wedding because Rebecca was having a bad day and needed company, when I worked Christmas Day at the hospital so my co-workers with young children could be home, even though my own children had stopped inviting me to their celebrations. Family comes first, and now Daniel was using my own words as a leash, pulling me exactly where he wanted me to go. I wore my good dress, the navy blue one with the pearl buttons that I'd bought for Rebecca's wedding 7 years ago. It still fit, though it hung differently now, my body having surrendered some of its substance to worry and irregular meals. I took the red line downtown, standing because the seats were full, gripping the pole as the train lurched and swayed. The car was packed with the morning commute, young professionals in their crisp suits and expensive headphones, students with backpacks covered in pins and patches, workers in uniform heading to service jobs. Everyone was absorbed in their phones, their books, their own private worlds. I caught my reflection in the dark window between stations, a 63-year-old woman with gray roots showing, lipstick applied with an unsteady hand, eyes that had learned to look away from mirrors. I looked like someone's grandmother, which I was. I looked like someone who mattered, which I wasn't sure I still was. The law office was in one of those glass towers that reflect the sky, making the building look like it's made of clouds and ambition. The lobby was all polished marble and contemporary art, the kind of aggressive wealth that makes people like me instinctively check that our shoes are clean. A security guard directed me to sign in, and I noticed my hand shaking as I wrote my name in the visitor log. Daniel met me near the elevator bank, and I noticed immediately how he wouldn't look at me directly. His suit was expensive, charcoal with subtle pinstripes, the kind of thing he couldn't afford 3 years ago when he was driving for Uber and asking me to cover his rent. His shoes were Italian leather, I could tell. His watch caught the light, something Swiss and complicated. Where did all this money come from? My money, I realized with a sickening lurch. He was wearing my house, my retirement, my future on his body like trophies. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice bright and hollow, like aluminum foil. "Thanks for coming." He leaned in for a hug, and I caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that smelled nothing like the boy who used to smell like grass stains and bubble gum. "What am I signing, Daniel?" "Just some paperwork, financial stuff. Don't worry about it." The words, "don't worry about it," have preceded every disaster in my life. When their father said, "don't worry about it," before disappearing for 3 days and coming home drunk. When the hospital administrator said, "don't worry about it," before announcing staff cuts. When the mechanic said, "don't worry about it," before my car needed $3,000 in repairs. Those 4 words are a verbal trapdoor, and I'd fallen through too many times to count. I followed him to the elevator, my reflection multiplying in the polished brass doors, an army of anxious mothers. In the elevator, Daniel made small talk about the weather, about traffic, about a restaurant he'd tried recently that had the most amazing Wagyu beef. I watched the numbers climb, 15, 20, 30, 35, and felt like I was ascending toward my own execution. The lawyer's office was all chrome and leather, the kind of aggressive modernity that makes you afraid to touch anything. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Chicago that stretched to the horizon, the lake a blue-gray shimmer in the distance. A man in his 40s with perfectly white teeth and a handshake like a vice introduced himself as Robert Kensington. His desk was a slab of glass that appeared to float, and everything on it was arranged with the precision of someone who controlled their environment absolutely. He slid a stack of papers across his glass desk, and I saw my name printed at the bottom of each page, lines waiting for my signature. "What is this?" I asked, picking up the first document. The words swam. Transfer of assets, relinquishment of claims, Bitcoin wallet access. The language was deliberately obscure, designed to confuse rather than clarify. "It's just formalizing some arrangements," Daniel said, finally meeting my eyes. His expression was practiced, patient, the look you give a child who's being difficult. "You know, making sure everything's clear. You always said you wanted us to be taken care of. But what am I giving up?" Robert Kensington smiled with practiced sympathy, the kind lawyers must teach in a special class. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're simply acknowledging that certain investments made in your name were actually collaborative family ventures. This protects everyone." "Protects everyone from what?" "From misunderstandings," Kensington said smoothly. "From questions about who owns what. You know how complicated these digital assets can be. This just makes everything clean and clear." I looked at Daniel, searching for the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard, who cried in my arms when his father left, who promised he'd take care of me when I got old. Instead, I saw a stranger wearing my son's face, a stranger who had learned to use love like currency and trust like a weapon. "I need to read these," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, come on, we've been over this." You trust me, right? There was an edge in his voice now, impatience bleeding through the performance. And there it was, the question that had been asked in 1,000 different ways over the years, the question that always came wrapped in obligation and guilt. Do you trust me? Do you love me? Do you believe I'd ever hurt you? The question that has only one acceptable answer, and any hesitation is treated as betrayal. I need time to think, I heard myself say, and Daniel's expression shifted, a flash of something cold and calculated before the mask of patience returned. Sure, Mom. Take your time. But Kensington's office bills by the hour, and you know how expensive these things can get. The threat was subtle but clear. Every minute I delayed cost money. My money. Money I didn't have to spare. Plus, I've got another meeting in 30 minutes. I cleared my whole morning for this. The guilt landed exactly where he'd aimed it. He'd cleared his whole morning. For me. Because I was demanding and difficult and ungrateful. I felt myself starting to fold, starting to reach for the pen, because what was the alternative? Making a scene in this elegant office, admitting I didn't trust my own son? Walking away and confirming that I was the problem everyone seemed to think I was? No, I said, and my voice was stronger this time. No, I need to take these home and read them properly. Mrs. Whitmore, Kensington interjected, I should mention that these documents have a time-sensitive component. There are tax implications that require immediate action. If we don't file by the end of this week, you could be looking at significant penalties. Tax implications. Penalties. More words designed to scare and confuse. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and gathered the papers into my purse. Then I guess I better read quickly. I left without signing, my purse clutched against my chest like armor. Daniel didn't follow me. I could feel his anger radiating behind me like heat from a furnace. But he didn't follow. In the elevator down, alone with my reflection, I saw that my hands were shaking, that I'd bitten my lip hard enough to draw blood, that I looked 10 years older than when I'd arrived. On the train ride home, I finally opened my phone and Googled the phrases I'd seen on those papers. The results made my stomach turn. I was signing away everything. The remaining proceeds from my house, the small retirement account I'd managed to salvage, even control of accounts I didn't remember opening. I was making Daniel the sole owner of assets that were, technically, still in my name. I was erasing myself from my own financial life. When I got home, I found an envelope that had been slipped under my door. Inside was a single photograph, old and creased. It showed Daniel at his high school graduation, me standing beside him with my hand on his shoulder, both of us grinning at the camera. We looked so happy, so full of hope. Daniel's face was young and open, unmarked by whatever had turned him into the man in the suit. My face was tired even then, but proud. So proud of this boy who was going to do great things. On the back, in handwriting I recognized as my own from 20 years ago, I'd written, "My greatest investment, worth more than all the gold in the world." The cruelty of it took my breath away. He'd chosen this photo deliberately, found it among whatever boxes of my things he still had access to, and sent it as a message. Remember who you're supposed to be. Remember what you're supposed to sacrifice. Remember that I'm worth more than money, more than your security, more than your peace. I sat on my couch and cried louder than I had in years. I cried for the boy in that photo who'd disappeared. I cried for the mother who'd believed love was enough. I cried for the house I'd sold, the future I'd given away, the woman I'd been before I learned that family could be a 4-letter word. I spent 38 years as a registered nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, working double shifts through holidays and birthdays, through my divorce and my mother's death, through every milestone I missed because someone else needed me more. I remember the exact moment I decided to retire early. Rebecca was pregnant with her second child, and she'd called me crying because the daycare costs were astronomical, and her husband's consulting firm had cut his hours. "Mom, "I don't know what we're going to do," she sobbed, and I heard myself saying, "I'll help. I can take early retirement and move closer. I'll watch the kids." I'd loved nursing, loved the purposefulness of it, the way a good shift made you feel like you'd actually accomplished something measurable and real. I loved my patients, especially the elderly ones who reminded me of my own parents, who needed not just medical care but human connection, someone to listen to their stories and hold their hands and treat them like they still mattered. But I was 57, and the 12-hour shifts were getting harder, and Rebecca needed me, and family comes first, always. Within 6 months, I'd cashed out my retirement accounts, paying penalties I didn't understand because the financial advisor might as well have been speaking Mandarin. "You'll lose approximately 30% to taxes and early withdrawal penalties," he'd explained. But I'd just nodded, my mind already in the future, already picturing myself with Emma and Jack, being useful, being needed, being grandma. I moved from my small house in Evanston to a cheaper apartment in the city, thinking I'd be closer to family, more available, more useful. Rebecca kissed my cheek when I handed her the first check for $12,000. "You're a lifesaver, Mom. We'll pay you back, I promise." I never saw that money again. But I did see my grandchildren, Emma and Jack, for about 6 months before Rebecca hired a professional nanny. "It's just easier this way, Mom. You understand." She'd explained it over coffee in her pristine kitchen, all white cabinets and marble countertops, while I tried not to feel like I was being fired from a job I'd volunteered for. Sasha has early childhood education training, and she's available full-time, and honestly, it's just more reliable. You understand, right? You have your doctor's appointments and your friends and your life. We can't expect you to revolve around our schedule. But I'd already rearranged my life around their schedule. I'd given up my career, my pension, my stability. I'd moved to be closer to them, and now I was dismissed with the gentle condescension of someone returning a sweater that didn't quite fit. Thomas was next. His daughter, my granddaughter Lily, had been diagnosed with juvenile diabetes at age 7. The insurance covered most of it, Thomas said, but there were gaps, experimental treatments, specialists who didn't take their plan. $15,000 would change everything, Mom. It's literally life or death. His voice on the phone had been frantic, desperate, and I'd felt that old familiar surge of purpose. My child needed me. My grandchild's life was at stake. What was money compared to that? I emptied my savings account the next day. I later learned, through a comment Lily made during a video call I wasn't supposed to hear, that she was doing fine, that the regular treatment was working perfectly, and that Daddy had bought a boat. "A boat, Grandma. We're going to keep it at the marina and everything." She'd been so excited, so innocent, not knowing that the boat had been purchased with money meant for her medical care, not knowing that her grandmother was eating ramen noodles and skipping medications because $15,000 was no longer available for emergencies. Daniel was the architect of my largest sacrifice. He came to me 3 years ago with charts and graphs, talking about blockchain technology and cryptocurrency markets, with the fevered enthusiasm of a prophet. He'd brought his laptop to my apartment, set it up on my kitchen table, and shown me presentations that might as well have been in a foreign language. "Mom, this is it. This is how people are building generational wealth. But you have to get in now, before it explodes. I've got connections, access to investment opportunities that regular people never see." He'd clicked through slides showing exponential growth curves, testimonials from people who'd turned thousands into millions, explanations of mining and wallets and blockchain that made my head spin. "If you put in 200,000, I can turn it into millions within 2 years. Millions, Mom. Think about what that would mean for all of us. You'd never have to worry about money again. Rebecca could quit her job and stay home with the kids. Thomas could pay off his house. I could start the business I've been dreaming about. We'd be set, the whole family, secure for generations." The number seemed impossible. I didn't have $200,000. But I had my grandmother's house, the one place that still felt like home, that still smelled like lilacs and cinnamon, where every floorboard creaked with memory. I'd spent every Christmas there as a child, learned to bake in that kitchen, brought my own babies home to that wraparound porch. The stained glass window in the stairwell caught the afternoon light and threw rainbows across the walls. My grandmother had planted the garden in the back, roses and peonies and tomatoes, and every spring they came back like promises that some things endure. "You'd have to sell the house," I said, and Daniel's face showed no hesitation. "Mom, it's just a building. Family is what matters, and this money will secure all our futures. You'll never have to worry again." Just a building, as if the walls didn't hold the echoes of every important moment in my life. As if the physical space we occupy doesn't matter, doesn't shape us, doesn't hold pieces of who we are. But he was right about one thing. Family did matter. And if selling the house meant taking care of my family, then what kind of person would I be to refuse? I sold the house to a developer who tore it down 3 weeks later to build condos. I'd driven past one last time before the demolition, and seeing the sold sign had felt like a betrayal of everyone who'd ever lived there, everyone who'd loved those rooms. My grandmother's roses were already dying from neglect. The porch where I'd taught Daniel to tie his shoes was sagging, and within a month it would all be rubble. I gave Daniel the money in certified checks, and he had me open accounts in both our names, for tax purposes, he said. He showed me screenshots of climbing numbers, of a balance that grew from 200,000 to 300,000 to 420,000 over the course of 6 months. "See, Mom? I told you. We're going to be rich." Each screenshot came with an explanation, delivered with confidence and sprinkled with jargon I didn't understand. "The market's moving faster than I predicted. The altcoins I invested in are performing even better than Bitcoin. We're seeing 20% returns monthly. This is exactly what I knew would happen." Then the screenshots stopped. When I asked, Daniel would sigh with theatrical patience. "Mom, you can't check these things daily. Markets fluctuate. You have to trust the process." When I asked to see the actual accounts, to log in myself, he'd get defensive. "You don't understand how this works. You'll just panic and want to pull everything out, and that's how people lose money. Trust me, okay? I'm handling it." The last time I tried to push, to demand real proof, was 8 months ago. We were at Rebecca's house for Sunday dinner, a rare gathering that felt more like a hostage negotiation than a family meal. I'd brought a pot roast, spent hours preparing it the way they all used to love, getting up at 6 a.m. to start the slow cooking process, adding the vegetables at exactly the right time, making the gravy from scratch like my mother taught me. I'd carried it on the train in an insulated carrier, protecting it like it was precious cargo, and nobody touched it because Rebecca had ordered sushi. "It's just easier," she said, not looking at me, arranging colorful rolls on expensive ceramic plates. I'd stood in her kitchen holding my pot roast, still warm in its dish, and felt like I was holding a symbol of everything wrong between us. I'd offered love, labor, tradition, connection. She'd ordered convenience. During dinner, I asked Daniel about the investments, and the table went silent. Rebecca's fork stopped midway to her mouth. Thomas's wife, Ashley, suddenly became very interested in her phone. Daniel's girlfriend, a woman half his age whose name I could never remember, looked uncomfortable and reached for her wine. Daniel set down his wine glass. Expensive wine, I noticed. Something with a French name on the label, and probably a price tag that would make me gasp. "Are you seriously doing this now, Mom? At family dinner?" "I just want to understand." "You want to understand? You want to understand how you're embarrassing me in front of everyone? How you're making me look like some kind of thief?" His voice was rising, his face reddening, and I saw Rebecca shoot him a warning look. "I didn't say—" "You didn't have to say it. It's written all over your face. You think I stole from you. My own mother thinks I'm a criminal." He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against Rebecca's hardwood floors, leaving a mark she'd probably blame me for later. "Daniel, I just want to see the accounts. I just want proof that the money is still there." He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against Rebecca's hardwood floors. "You want proof? The proof is that I've been working my ass off trying to build something for this family while you sit in your apartment feeling sorry for yourself. The proof is that I took your money and actually tried to do something with it instead of letting it rot in some bank account earning nothing. But you know what? I'm done. I'm done trying to help someone who doesn't trust me." He walked out, and nobody followed him. Nobody defended me. Rebecca cleared plates with aggressive efficiency, the clatter of dishes her commentary. Thomas retreated to the living room, where I could hear him telling his kids to keep it down. His wife Ashley finally looked at me, her expression a mixture of pity and annoyance. "You know, Eleanor, you really should be more grateful. Daniel's been under a lot of stress trying to manage your portfolio. Maybe cut him some slack?" I left shortly after, carrying my untouched pot roast back on the train, the Tupperware container warm against my chest. An elderly man sitting across from me smiled sympathetically. "Family dinner?" he asked. "Something like that?" I said. "I've got 3 kids, haven't seen any of them in 4 years. Sometimes I think about calling, but then I remember how much they disappointed me, and how much I probably disappointed them. And it just seems easier to let the silence do the talking." We rode together in companionable quiet until his stop, and when he stood to leave, he touched my shoulder gently. "Don't let them make you small," he said. "You're somebody's whole world, even if it's just your own." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the train rumble past, and I started adding numbers in my head. The house, $200,000 to Daniel. The retirement accounts, $45,000 split between Rebecca and Thomas. The smaller gifts, the emergencies, the just this once requests, another $60,000, maybe more. I'd given them over $300,000 in 6 years, and I was living in a studio apartment where the radiator clanged all night, and I could hear my neighbor's television through the walls. I got up and pulled out my boxes of photographs, the ones I'd been meaning to organize for years. I spread them across the floor and saw my life in reverse, working backward from color to faded Polaroids. There I was at Daniel's college graduation, beaming with pride. There was Rebecca's wedding, me in that blue dress, already trying to make myself smaller in the frame, already standing slightly behind everyone else. Thomas's baseball games, me in the bleachers alone because their father had already left, and I was working double shifts to keep us afloat. Further back, Daniel as a baby, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger. Rebecca at 3, covered in finger paint, laughing at something I'd said. Thomas taking his first steps toward me, his face pure trust and joy. Who were these people? Where did they go? When did I become just a resource to be extracted, a well to draw from until I ran dry? I found a photo of my mother, taken a few months before she died. She was in her garden, her hands dirty with soil, surrounded by tomato plants. She'd called me the week before she died and asked if I could visit. "I just want to see you, Eleanor. Just you, not the kids, not the chaos, just my daughter." I'd told her I was too busy, that I had a shift I couldn't trade, that the kids had activities. All of it was true, but all of it was also an excuse, a way to avoid seeing how frail she'd become, how the cancer was eating her from the inside. She died on a Tuesday morning, and I was at work, helping someone else's mother. When I got the call, I was in the middle of changing an IV bag for a patient who kept calling me by her daughter's name, who held my hand and thanked me for coming to visit. I had to finish my shift before I could leave, had to maintain my professional composure while my insides were screaming. I never forgave myself for that. But my children, apparently, had inherited my mother's capacity for disappointment. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning in March. When Chicago was caught between winter and spring, the air raw and uncertain. I'd gone to the bank to deposit my Social Security check, and the teller, a young woman named Melissa who always remembered my name, looked at her screen and frowned. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm showing several large withdrawals from your checking account over the past few weeks. Did you authorize these?" I felt my stomach drop. "What withdrawals?" She turned her monitor so I could see. 5 withdrawals, each for $1,000, dated over the past 3 weeks. The account that should have had $6,000 in it, my entire safety net, now had $812. "I didn't authorize any of these," I whispered. Melissa's expression shifted to concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, does anyone else have access to your account? A family member, maybe?" Daniel. When I'd opened the joint investment accounts, he'd insisted I add him to my checking account too. "Just in case of emergencies," he'd said. "Just so someone can help if you need it." I'd been hesitant, but he'd made it sound so reasonable, so practical. What if something happened to me? What if I fell or got sick and someone needed to pay my bills? It was just common sense, he'd said, just being responsible. I somehow made it home, my legs carrying me on autopilot while my mind spun. I called Daniel, and it rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I called again, and again. On the 4th call, he answered, and I could hear he was somewhere public, voices and laughter in the background. "Mom, I'm kind of busy." "You took my money, $5,000 from my checking account." Silence. Then, "Mom, we talked about this. I told you I needed to rebalance the portfolio, move some assets around. It's temporary. You didn't tell me anything. You stole from me." Jesus Christ, Mom. Stole? Really? After everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed trying to help you, you're going to accuse me of theft? "You know what? I can't do this right now. I'm at lunch with investors, and you're being hysterical. I want my money back. Today." "Well, I don't have it today. It's invested." That's how investing works. "I'll get it back to you when the liquidity improves, and maybe next time, try having a little faith in your own son." He hung up. I called back, but now it went straight to voicemail. I called Rebecca, and she answered on the first ring. Her voice clipped with busy mom efficiency. "Mom, what's up? I've got exactly 2 minutes before I have to leave for Emma's orthodontist appointment." Daniel took money from my account without asking. $5,000. A pause. "Okay, and? Did you tell him he could?" "No, I didn't even know about it until the bank told me." "Mom, maybe you forgot? You know you've been kind of scattered lately. Daniel's been managing your money, so maybe you just didn't remember giving him permission." "Rebecca, I'm not senile. I didn't forget. He stole from me." "Oh my God, Mom. Stole? He's your son. He's trying to help you. Maybe instead of attacking him, you should be grateful that someone's willing to deal with your finances because clearly you can't handle them yourself. What is wrong with you people? What's wrong with us? Mom, you're calling me at work, making wild accusations about Daniel, acting like we're all out to get you. Maybe the problem isn't us. Maybe you need to look at yourself and ask why you're so paranoid all the time." She hung up. I sat on my couch and stared at the water stain on the ceiling, shaped like a map of somewhere I'd never go, and I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart breaking. That had broken so many times it was more scar tissue than organ. No, this was different. This was the sound of chains snapping, of a cage door swinging open. I went to my computer, an old laptop that Daniel had given me 3 years ago after he'd upgraded. I logged into my email and searched for anything related to the accounts. What I found made me physically ill. Dozens of emails from cryptocurrency exchanges, from investment platforms, showing transactions I'd never authorized, transfers, withdrawals, account closures, all signed with electronic signatures that looked like mine, but I'd never actually created. I clicked through with shaking hands, piecing together the evidence. The $420,000 that Daniel had shown me in screenshots 6 months ago? Gone. Withdrawn in chunks over the following weeks, transferred to accounts I didn't recognize. The remaining balance in the one account I could actually access? $16,000 and change. I'd given him $200,000. He'd shown me balances that climbed to over $400,000. And now there was $16,000 left. I did the math in my head, then on paper, then in a spreadsheet, checking and rechecking, hoping I was wrong. But the numbers didn't lie. My son had either lost or stolen $384,000 of my money. I printed everything. Every email, every statement, every screenshot. My printer? A dinosaur from 2008 that I'd rescued from a sidewalk. Wheezed and complained, but it did its job. By the time the sun set, I had a stack of papers 3 inches thick, the documentary evidence of my own financial assassination. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 6 years. I poured myself a glass of whiskey from the bottle I'd bought when I moved into this apartment, thinking I'd toast to new beginnings. I'd never opened it. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by papers that proved my children's betrayal, and I drank slowly, letting the burn in my throat mirror the burn in my chest. My phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. "Mom, I talked to Daniel. He's really hurt that you don't trust him. He's thinking about cutting contact because this is too toxic for him. Maybe that's for the best." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "Okay." She responded immediately. "Okay? That's it? You're just giving up on your own son?" "I'm tired, Rebecca. I'm 63 years old and I'm tired." "Well, good. Maybe now you'll stop creating drama and let the rest of us live in peace." I blocked her number. Then I blocked Thomas's. Then Daniel's. The silence that followed was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. I sat there until the whiskey was gone and the city lights blurred through my tears. And then I did something I hadn't done in decades. I screamed. Just once, loud and raw and furious. A sound that came from somewhere deep inside where I'd been storing my voice for 50 years, waiting for permission to use it. My neighbor, an old man I'd never spoken to, banged on the wall. "You okay in there?" "No," I yelled back, "but I will be." The next morning, I walked to the police station on Harrison Street. It was a Friday, and the station was chaotic with the detritus of Thursday night. People sleeping off drunk and disorderlies. Officers typing reports with practiced boredom, the smell of bad coffee and body odor. The fluorescent lights were harsh and unforgiving, making everyone look sick and exhausted. I waited 2 hours on a plastic chair that was bolted to the floor, watching the parade of human misery and bureaucratic necessity before a detective could see me. And when I finally sat across from Detective Maria Santos, I saw her trying to categorize me. Old woman, probably confused, probably wasting everyone's time. She was younger than me by maybe 20 years, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her desk was cluttered with files and coffee cups, photos of kids pinned to her cubicle wall. "How can I help you, Mrs. Whitmore?" I opened my folder, the 3 inches of proof that I was not confused, not senile, not mistaken. "I need to report fraud, financial exploitation. My son has stolen nearly $400,000 from me." Her expression shifted. She pulled her chair closer and began reading. It took 45 minutes to go through everything, and when she looked up, her eyes held a mix of anger and sympathy I'd seen before in my nursing days. The look you give someone whose trust has been weaponized against them. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be straight with you. This is going to be a difficult case. He's your son, he had legal access to most of these accounts, and a defense attorney will argue that these were gifts, not theft. They weren't gifts. I gave him money to invest for both of us. He was supposed to be managing it, protecting it." I believe you. But proving that in court is complicated. Do you have anything in writing? Any documents where he explicitly promised to return the money or acknowledged it wasn't his? I thought about all the conversations, the verbal assurances, the phone calls where he'd explained and explained and explained until I just accepted his version of reality. Nothing in writing, nothing concrete, just the word of a mother against her son. No, I admitted. Detective Santos leaned back in her chair, studying me. Okay, here's what we can do. I'm going to open an investigation. We'll subpoena the account records, bring him in for questioning, see if he'll incriminate himself. But I need you to understand that this might not end the way you want it to. These family financial cases, they're brutal. They take years. And in the end, even if we prove he defrauded you, getting any money back is a whole other nightmare. She paused, then continued more gently. I've worked these cases before. Adult children stealing from elderly parents. It's more common than you think. And it's devastating because the victims don't just lose money. They lose their families. Are you prepared for that? Because once we start this process, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son, with your other children, it will change forever. It's already changed, I said. I just didn't want to see it. I don't care about the money anymore, I said. And I realized I meant it. I want him to understand that I'm not just going to disappear quietly. I want him to face what he's done. Detective Santos nodded slowly. Then we'll do everything we can. Over the following weeks, I learned to live in limbo. Detective Santos would call with updates. They'd subpoenaed records. Daniel had hired a lawyer. They were building a case, but it would take time. Meanwhile, I existed in a strange new reality where I had no children. Or rather, where I'd amputated them like gangrenous limbs to save the rest of myself. I was in the checkout line at the Jewel on Clark Street when I ran into Ashley, Thomas's wife. She saw me and her face went through a remarkable series of expressions. Surprise, discomfort, something that might have been guilt, then settling on anger. Eleanor, she said, not Mom like she used to. I heard you're making some serious accusations. I'm not making accusations. I'm telling the truth. Thomas is devastated. You know that? His own mother calling him a thief, cutting him off without even hearing his side. I didn't accuse Thomas of anything. I accused Daniel. It's all the same family. You attack one of us, you attack all of us. And that $15,000 you're claiming Thomas misused for Lily's medical bills? We still have the receipts. Every penny went where we said it did. Then you won't mind showing those receipts to the police. Her face flushed. We're not doing this. We're not playing this game where you get to be the martyr and we're the ungrateful children. You chose this. You chose to blow up the family over money. So congratulations, Eleanor. You won. You're all alone now. I hope it was worth it. She walked away before I could respond, and I stood there holding my basket of groceries, yogurt, bread, bananas, the cart of someone eating alone, and I felt the weight of her words settle on my shoulders. Was she right? Had I blown everything up over money? Was I being unreasonable, paranoid, selfish? Then I remembered the way Daniel had whispered, "Cry louder," when I'd called him weeping about my empty account. I remembered Rebecca suggesting I was senile. I remembered Thomas blocking my number without a word, and I stood up straighter, paid for my groceries, and went home. The case moved forward with bureaucratic slowness. Detective Santos explained that they were having trouble getting cooperation from the cryptocurrency exchanges where most of the money had moved. The transactions had been split across multiple platforms, routed through different accounts, converted from dollars to Bitcoin to Ethereum and back to dollars, a shell game designed to obscure the trail. But they were persistent, and slowly, they built a picture. 6 months after I'd first walked into that police station, Detective Santos called me to her office. She had a thick file in front of her and an expression I couldn't read. Mrs. Whitmore, we have enough for charges: wire fraud, theft by deception, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The DA is willing to move forward with prosecution. Vulnerable adult? I repeated. You're over 60. That's the legal definition, and it actually helps us makes the charges more serious. I nodded, feeling both validated and diminished. I was vulnerable. I'd let myself become that. There's one thing I need to tell you, Detective Santos continued. We've traced about $40,000 of your money. It went to a down payment on a house in Naperville. Your son bought a house with your money while claiming he was investing it for you. The room tilted. A house. He'd bought himself a house, a symbol of stability and permanence and family, with money he'd stolen from his mother, who was living in a studio apartment on the South Side. Does Rebecca know? I asked. We believe so. There are text messages between them discussing the purchase. Nothing explicitly incriminating, but enough to suggest she was aware of the situation. My daughter had known. They'd all known, and they'd let me believe I was crazy, paranoid, ungrateful. Okay, I said. Let's go forward. The trial was scheduled for October, nearly a year after I'd first walked into that police station. In the months leading up to it, I learned what it meant to be truly alone. My phone never rang. My mailbox held only bills and junk mail. Holidays came and went unmarked. I spent Christmas by myself, eating Chinese takeout and watching old movies, and it was both the loneliest and most peaceful Christmas I'd had in years. I also learned what it meant to take up space again. I joined a community center in my neighborhood that offered classes for seniors, and I signed up for watercolor painting. I was terrible at it. My landscapes muddy and my portraits vaguely monstrous, but I kept showing up. The instructor, a retired art teacher named Gloria, would stand behind me and say things like, "Don't be afraid to use more color. Let yourself be bold." Gloria was in her 70s, with paint-stained fingers and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. She'd taught art in Chicago public schools for 40 years before retiring. You know what I love about teaching adults? She told me one afternoon. Children paint with complete confidence. They don't question whether they're good enough. They just create. Then somewhere along the way, we learn to doubt ourselves, to compare, to hold back. Teaching seniors is about helping them find that confidence again. You're not trying to be Monet. You're trying to express something that's uniquely yours. I started going to a support group for adult children estrangement, meeting every Tuesday evening in the basement of a Methodist church. The first time I walked in, I almost turned around, ashamed that I'd ended up here, in a circle of folding chairs with other parents whose children had discarded them. The room smelled like coffee and old carpet, and a sign on the wall proclaimed, "God is love," in cheerful letters that felt wildly incongruous with the pain gathered beneath it. But then a woman named Dorothy stood up to share her story, and it was so much like mine. The gifts that became demands, the gratitude that turned to resentment, the slow realization that love had become transaction, that I sat down and stayed. My daughter told me I was too needy, Dorothy said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. Too needy. I'd spent 40 years putting her needs before my own, and somehow that made me the needy one. She said I was draining her emotional energy, that she needed to set boundaries for her mental health. And you know what the worst part is? I apologized to her. I apologized for needing my own daughter. Everyone in the circle nodded. We all knew that particular knife twist, the way our sacrifices had been reframed as weaknesses, our love as obligation, our presence as burden. When it was my turn to share, I told them about Daniel's whisper, "Cry louder," and how those two words had contained every dismissal, every diminishment, every moment I'd been made to feel small. He said it like I was performing grief, I explained, like my pain was exaggerated, theatrical, something to be mocked. And the worst part is I believed him. For months I thought maybe I was being too sensitive, too emotional, too much. A man across the circle, Bill, who'd been cut off by his sons after his wife died, spoke up. They need us to be too much. It justifies what they're doing. If we're too needy, too emotional, too difficult, then they're not abandoning us. They're setting healthy boundaries. His words hit like a revelation. The narrative had been carefully constructed to make our pain our fault, our needs, our failure, our existence our transgression. The group gave me something I hadn't had in years. Witnesses. People who saw my pain and didn't flinch from it, didn't try to fix it or minimize it, just let it exist as real and valid and worth acknowledging. Dorothy became a friend. We started meeting for coffee on Saturdays at a diner near my apartment. She was 71, a retired librarian whose daughter had cut her off after Dorothy refused to babysit every weekend. She said I was being selfish, Dorothy told me over eggs and toast, because I wanted 1 weekend a month to myself. 40 years I'd been a mother, and asking for 4 days a month made me selfish. We'd talk for hours, 2 women excavating our lives, trying to understand how we'd gotten here. We'd compare notes on our children's tactics, recognizing patterns we'd missed when we were isolated in our own experiences. The gaslighting, the DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. The way they'd use therapy language against us, boundaries, self-care, toxic relationships. All words that sounded healthy until they were wielded as weapons to justify abandonment. You know what I realized? Dorothy said one Saturday. My daughter learned to treat me like this because I taught her it was okay. Every time I accepted less than I deserved, every time I apologized for things I didn't do wrong, every time I prioritized her needs over my own, I was teaching her that my feelings didn't matter. I thought I was modeling selfless love, but I was really modeling self-erasure. The trial began on a Tuesday in October. I walked into the Cook County Courthouse wearing the same blue dress I'd worn to meet Daniel at the lawyer's office, and I felt like I was attending a funeral. In a way, I was. The death of the family I'd thought I had, the final confirmation that the people I'd raised had become strangers. The courthouse was all marble and severity, with high ceilings that made voices echo and metal detectors that beeped and buzzed as people emptied their pockets into plastic bins. Security guards with bored expressions directed traffic. Lawyers in expensive suits moved through the corridors with practiced efficiency, their shoes clicking authoritatively on the polished floors. Daniel arrived with his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in an expensive suit who looked at me like I was something distasteful she'd found on her shoe. Her name was Patricia Hardwick, and I'd Googled her before the trial. She specialized in white-collar defense and had a reputation for aggressive tactics. Rebecca came to support him, sitting in the gallery with Thomas, their expressions uniform in their judgment. They'd discussed this, I realized. They'd agreed on their story, coordinated their narrative. They'd chosen their side, and it wasn't mine. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. The financial records showing transfers I'd never authorized. The cryptocurrency accounts opened in my name, but controlled entirely by Daniel. The emails where he'd forged my signature. The house in Naperville, purchased with my money while I was living in poverty. Expert witnesses testified about financial exploitation, about how perpetrators often target their own family members, about patterns of manipulation and control. A forensic accountant named Dr. Marcus Chen took the stand and walked the jury through the money trail with remarkable clarity. What we see here is a sophisticated scheme of financial manipulation, he explained, pointing to charts and graphs that made the theft visible. The defendant systematically moved Mrs. Whitmore's assets through multiple platforms and accounts, creating a deliberately complex paper trail designed to confuse and obscure. This isn't incompetence or bad luck. This is intentional obfuscation. Daniel's lawyer argued that I'd given him the money willingly, that I'd wanted him to invest it, that I'd been fully aware of every transaction. She painted me as a bitter old woman who'd changed her mind about her generosity and was now trying to punish her successful son out of spite and jealousy. Mrs. Whitmore is experiencing what we call donor's remorse, she explained to the jury. She made choices she now regrets, and rather than take responsibility for those choices, she's attempting to criminalize her son's good faith efforts to help her build wealth. When it was my turn to testify, I climbed into the witness box feeling like I was made of glass, like the slightest pressure would shatter me into pieces. The prosecutor, a young woman named Jennifer Chen, led me through my story gently, asking about the house sale, the retirement accounts, the promises Daniel had made. "Mrs. Whitmore, did you give your son permission to withdraw $5,000 from your checking account without telling you?" "No." "Did you authorize the transfer of $384,000 from your investment accounts to his personal accounts?" "No. He told me the money was being invested for both of us." "Did you know he was buying a house with your money?" "No." Then came the cross-examination, and Daniel's lawyer approached me like a shark who'd just smelled blood in the water. "Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you have difficulty remembering things? That you've been, as your daughter described it, scattered in recent years?" "I'm not senile." "I didn't say you were, but you're 63 years old. You live alone. You've been under significant financial stress. Isn't it possible that you simply don't remember giving your son permission for these transactions?" "I would remember giving away my entire life savings." "Would you? Because according to your bank records, you've made several errors in recent years. Overdrafts, missed payments, bounced checks. That suggests some level of cognitive difficulty, doesn't it?" Jennifer objected, and the judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The lawyer had planted the seed. Maybe I was just a confused old woman who didn't remember what she'd agreed to. Then Daniel took the stand, and I barely recognized him. He was poised, sympathetic, wounded. He talked about how hard it had been to watch me struggle financially, how he'd wanted to help, how I'd begged him to take the money and make it grow. "My mom was desperate," he said, his voice breaking just enough to seem genuine. "She'd just sold her house and she was terrified that she wouldn't have enough to survive. She asked me, no, she begged me, to invest it for her. She said she trusted me, that I was the only one who could save her." It was a masterful performance, and I watched the jury's faces soften. He was a dutiful son trying to help his difficult mother. I was a difficult mother punishing her dutiful son. But then Jennifer stood up for redirect, and she held up a piece of paper. "Mr. Whitmore, you testified that your mother begged you to invest her money, that this was all at her request. Is that correct?" "Yes." "And you testified that you made every effort to keep her informed, to make sure she understood what was happening with her investments?" "Absolutely. I was totally transparent." "Then can you explain this email?" She projected it onto a screen for the jury to see. It was from Daniel to Rebecca, dated 8 months ago. "Mom's asking questions again about the accounts, getting harder to dodge her, thinking I should just tell her everything tanked in the market crash and move the rest of the money to offshore accounts before she lawyers up. What do you think?" The courtroom went silent. Daniel's face lost its carefully constructed sympathy. And for just a second, I saw the naked calculation underneath. That was taken out of context," he stammered. "What context would make it acceptable to discuss hiding your mother's money from her?" I was joking. It was a joke between siblings. "A joke about committing fraud?" His lawyer objected. They argued. The judge ruled. But it didn't matter. The jury had seen behind the mask. Jennifer pressed further. "Mr. Whitmore, in this email you reference moving the rest of the money to offshore accounts. What money were you referring to?" I don't remember." "You don't remember? This was 8 months ago." She pulled up another document. "At the time of this email, your mother's account still showed a balance of approximately $68,000. 1 month later, those accounts were empty except for $16,000. Where did the other $52,000 go?" "It was invested." "In what? Show me the investments." He couldn't. He fumbled through explanations that contradicted each other, claimed records he couldn't produce. referenced platforms that didn't match the account statements. With each question, he unraveled further. Rebecca's face was ashen in the gallery. Thomas was staring at his hands. They'd known. They'd all known, and they'd let it happen. The trial lasted 3 days, and the jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they came back, the foreman stood up and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Daniel was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, fined $300,000 in restitution, and ordered to surrender the house in Naperville. The judge, a woman in her 70s with steel gray hair, looked at him with an expression of profound disappointment. "Mr. Whitmore, what you did to your mother is particularly egregious because it violated the most fundamental of trusts. She gave you everything, and you took even more. You weaponized her love against her, made her doubt her own reality, isolated her from support systems, all while systematically stealing everything she'd worked for. The law recognizes financial exploitation of vulnerable adults as a serious crime because of cases exactly like this. You preyed on your mother's trust, her fear, her desire to help her children, and you did it without remorse. I hope you spend your time in prison reflecting on the person you've become." I sat in the gallery and felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication, no relief. Just a vast emptiness where my family used to be. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into a cold October afternoon, the kind of gray Chicago day that makes you understand why Midwesterners are the way they are. The sky was the color of old concrete, and a sharp wind cut through my coat. Rebecca was waiting by my car, her face blotchy from crying. "Mom," she said, and her voice cracked. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was that bad." "You knew enough." I thought you were just being paranoid. Daniel said you were getting confused, that you didn't understand how investments worked. He showed me statements, showed me numbers. I believed him." "You believed him over me, your brother over your mother." "I'm sorry. God, Mom, I'm so sorry." "Do you know what it's like?" I asked, my voice steady. "To realize that your children see you as something to be managed, a problem to be solved or avoided or medicated until you're quiet? Do you know what it's like to understand that the people you'd die for would barely inconvenience themselves to help you? That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass. "You want to talk about fair? I gave you $12,000 when you didn't need it, when you just wanted to avoid the inconvenience of paying for childcare. I gave Thomas $15,000 for medical bills that didn't exist. I gave Daniel everything, including my trust and my dignity. And when I had nothing left to give, you all decided I was the problem. So don't talk to me about fair. What do you want from me, Mom? You want me to grovel. You want me to say I'm a terrible daughter? Fine, I'm a terrible daughter. I let you down. I believed Daniel when I should have believed you. I was selfish and lazy, and I took you for granted. Is that what you need to hear?" "I don't need anything from you anymore," I said, and I meant it. I needed you when I was alone and scared and being robbed by my own son. But you weren't there. You chose his story over mine. So now you get to live with that choice, and I get to live without you. Mom, please, don't do this. Don't throw away our relationship over this. I'm not throwing it away. You already did, years ago. I'm just finally acknowledging it." I got in my car and drove away, leaving her standing in the parking lot, and I didn't look back. The months after the trial were strange, like learning to walk again after a long illness. I had the house in Naperville, which the court had ordered surrendered. I could have moved there, started over in the suburbs with a yard and a garage and neighbors I didn't know. But the house felt tainted, built on the bones of my betrayal. So I sold it and put the money in a trust that Daniel could never touch. With some of that money, I did something I'd never allowed myself. I traveled. I went to New Mexico and stayed in an adobe house in Taos, where the sky was so big it made me dizzy. I painted terrible watercolors of the mountains and ate green chili until my lips burned. I went to Maine and stayed in a bed and breakfast in Bar Harbor, where I ate lobster rolls and watched the lighthouse beam cut through the fog. I went alone to all these places, but I didn't feel lonely. Loneliness, I'd learned, wasn't about being physically alone. It was about being with people who made you feel invisible, who looked through you like you were already gone. Solitude, by contrast, was a gift I gave myself. In Maine, I met a woman named Susan who was also traveling alone. She was 68, recently divorced, and gloriously angry about it. "He left me for his dental hygienist," she said over wine on the B&B's porch, laughing with a kind of furious joy. A woman who cleans teeth for a living was more interesting to him than I was after 43 years of marriage. And you know what? Good. I hope they're very happy together. I hope she picks up his socks and listens to his stories about golf and pretends to be fascinated. I'm done. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "Everything. Anything. I'm going to take up rock climbing and learn to play the accordion and maybe get a tattoo. I'm going to be the person I was before I spent 4 decades making myself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be." We toasted to that, 2 women reclaiming their lives from people who'd stopped seeing them as human. Back in Chicago, I rejoined my estrangement support group, and I shared my story of the trial, the verdict, the hollow victory. Dorothy hugged me afterward, her arms surprisingly strong. "You did it," she said. "You told the truth, and you were believed. That's more than most of us get." "It doesn't feel like victory," I admitted. "No, it wouldn't, because you didn't want to win a trial. You wanted your family back. But the family you wanted never actually existed. You see that now, right? You loved a fantasy, a version of your children that they never were. And now you get to grieve that, and then you get to build something real." I went home that night and stood in front of my bathroom mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in years. I saw a woman who'd survived. Gray hair I'd stopped dyeing. Lines around my eyes from years of squinting at worry. A body that had carried children, worked double shifts, given everything until nothing remained. But also, eyes that were clearer than they'd been in years. A jaw that no longer clenched in constant anxiety. Shoulders that had finally set down the burden of everyone else's expectations. I thought about Daniel in prison, about Rebecca trying to rebuild a relationship I'd never agreed to restore, about Thomas's silence that spoke louder than any apology. I thought about the 38 years I'd spent as a nurse, caring for other people's parents while neglecting my own needs. I thought about my mother in her garden, asking me to visit, and me too busy being needed by everyone but her. "I'm sorry," I whispered to my reflection, and I wasn't sure if I was apologizing to my mother, to my younger self, or to the woman I saw now, still learning how to exist without being of service. 2 years after the trial, I got a letter from Daniel. It was forwarded through his lawyer, as per the restraining order I'd filed. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I opened it. "Dear Mom," it began, and I almost put it down right there, not ready for whatever manipulation would follow. But I kept reading. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. The therapist here in prison has me doing this thing where I write down the truth, not the version I tell myself to make it easier to sleep at night, but the actual truth. So here it is. I stole from you. I lied to you. I made you think you were crazy so I could keep taking. I watched you struggle and I did nothing. Worse than nothing, I made it harder. I told Rebecca and Thomas that you were getting senile so they'd dismiss your concerns. I told myself I was helping, that I'd pay you back when the investments hit. But that was a lie too. There were no investments. I spent your money on myself, on my lifestyle, on trying to look successful so I wouldn't feel like a failure. When you called crying about the empty account and I told you to cry louder, I was making fun of you. I was literally mocking your pain because it was inconvenient for me. I don't know who that makes me, but I know it's not anyone you should have to call your son. I'm not asking you to visit or write back or anything. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did now, that I understand I didn't just steal your money. I stole your trust, your peace, your belief that your family would protect you. I stole the last good years you might have had with your grandchildren. I stole your ability to feel safe. You deserved better. You deserved a son who loved you more than he loved himself. I'm sorry I wasn't that person. Daniel. I read the letter 3 times, and each time I felt different things. Anger that he'd waited 2 years to acknowledge what he'd done. Sadness for the boy I'd raised who'd become this person. Relief that I'd been right, that I wasn't crazy or paranoid or too sensitive. And finally, a kind of tired acceptance that this was as close to closure as I'd ever get. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw the letter away either. I put it in a box with all the legal documents, the evidence of my family's betrayal, an archive of pain that I no longer needed to carry but couldn't quite release. On the afternoon of my 65th birthday, I sat on a bench in Millennium Park, watching tourists take selfies with the bean. The sky reflected and distorted in its silver surface. I'd spent the morning at my watercolor class, where Gloria had praised my latest painting, a landscape of Lake Michigan that actually looked like what it was supposed to be. I'd bought myself a cupcake from a bakery on Michigan Avenue, chocolate with raspberry frosting, and I ate it slowly, savoring each bite. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "Mom, it's Rebecca. I know you don't want to hear from me, but Emma's graduating high school next month. She'd really like you to be there. No pressure, no expectations. Just an invitation. She misses her grandmother." I stared at the message for a long time, watching my cupcake's frosting melt slightly in the May sunshine. Emma would be 18 now. Almost an adult, someone I'd hardly seen in the 6 years since I'd cut ties with Rebecca. I tried to picture her face and couldn't quite manage it, could only conjure a younger version, gap-toothed and giggling. I typed and deleted several responses. "I'll think about it. No thank you. After everything you've done, you think I'd come because you asked?" In the end, I just wrote, "Tell Emma congratulations. I wish her all the best." I blocked the number and finished my cupcake. That evening, back in my apartment, I looked around at the life I'd built from ruins. The walls were covered with my terrible watercolors, bright splashes of color that made me happy despite their technical failures. Books I'd actually wanted to read were stacked on every surface, no longer having to compete with other people's needs. The kitchen smelled like the soup I was making for myself, a recipe I'd found in a cookbook my grandmother had left me. Finally having time to cook something that took hours of simmering. On my refrigerator was a card from Dorothy, from my support group. On the front was a quote from Maya Angelou. "You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them." Inside, Dorothy had written, "Happy birthday to the strongest woman I know. Love, your chosen family." I made myself tea and sat by the window, watching the sun set over Chicago, the sky turning shades of orange and pink that I'd tried to capture in paint, but never quite managed. The elevated train rumbled past, right on schedule, and instead of being annoyed by the noise, I found it comforting, proof that the world continued turning whether I was useful to anyone or not. I thought about the girl I'd been at 20, nursing school, so eager to help, to heal, to be needed. I thought about the woman I'd been at 40, exhausted and overworked but proud of my children, believing their success was my success. I thought about the woman I'd been at 63, broken and betrayed, standing in a bank being told her account was empty. And I thought about who I was now, at 65, sitting in my small apartment with no family but lots of peace, with no validation but lots of self-respect, with no one to take care of but myself. "Cry louder," Daniel had whispered, making my pain into performance. But I'd learned something in these years of solitude and rebuilding. My pain didn't need an audience to be real. My worth didn't need validation to exist. My life didn't need witnesses to matter. I'd cried loud enough for a jury to hear, and they'd believed me. But more importantly, I'd cried loud enough for myself to hear, and I'd finally listened. That night, I slept peacefully in my small bed in my small apartment, and I dreamed of nothing at all, just the soft darkness of true rest, the kind that comes when you're no longer carrying anyone else's weight. In the morning, I'd wake up and paint something. Maybe it would be good, maybe it wouldn't. But it would be mine, created for no one's benefit but my own. And that felt like victory enough. The lesson I learned, the one I'd share with anyone willing to listen, is this. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop loving people who hurt you. Not because you're giving up or being cruel, but because you're finally choosing yourself. And that choice, that singular act of self-preservation, can feel like both ending and beginning, like death and rebirth happening in the same breath. I survived my family. And in surviving them, I found myself. So I ask you now, as I sit here with my tea and my terrible watercolors and my hard-won peace, have you ever lived something like this? Have you ever loved someone so much you forgot to love yourself? Have you ever been so busy being needed that you forgot you had needs too? If you have, know this. It's not too late to choose differently. It's never too late to say no, to set boundaries, to walk away from people who take and take until you're empty. It's never too late to matter to yourself. Tell me in the comments. Share your story, or just say you understand. Let's build something here. A community of survivors who chose themselves after years of choosing everyone else. And if this story moved you, if it made you feel less alone, please like and subscribe. Not for me, but for the next person who needs to hear that they're not crazy, not selfish, not wrong for wanting to be treated with basic human dignity. Because that person exists. They're out there right now, Googling things like, is my family using me? And, am I being financially exploited? And, why doesn't my family love me? And maybe, just maybe, they'll find this video, this story, this proof that survival is possible and that life after family can be beautiful in ways you never imagined. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for letting my pain matter. Until next time, take care of yourselves, you deserve it.